Okay, y'all, this is the face of somebody whose computer just did them wrong. I just recorded. I don't even want to know how much video footage of this idea, but I'm going to do it again because I really want to talk about this list. So, hi, my name is Nicole. I am going to take you through the Daily Telegraph's 100 Best Novels in the World, 1899 edition. So, this is a time of year where all these book lists are coming out, long list, short list, award winners, this and that, best books a year, notable books a year, that kind of thing. And I get really excited about it, but then I realize these aren't the books that I read. I read a lot of classic fiction and I intersperse other things in there just to keep me going. But I really like classic fiction. And so on Belle's Library, I'll link her channel below, she mentioned her 1899 project and that it was a project where she is, I guess, trying to read through all over the course of a long period of time, all 100 books that are on this list. And basically, what it is, it's a newspaper, I guess, in London called the Daily Telegraph. Back in 1899, created a list of the 100 best novels in the world. And this included novels not just from that century, but previous centuries, not just from England, but from all over the world as far as they knew it, which probably largely means other parts of Europe and um, writers in the New World, America, that kind of thing. But anyway, I found this really fascinating. I wanted to look at the list. I've done a lot of finagling. Originally, I was going to show you each of the books and a little bit of a description on Storygraph. That was a huge mega fail. Okay, I've tried and tried again. I'm not trying again. So I have found this wonderful website called librarything.com where they have the whole list there, as far as I can tell, and some sort of little picture of the book. And actually, slightly better than Storygraph, they do actually have some mini blurbs on some of the books that I couldn't find on Storygraph. So I'm going to just quickly. I'm going to go through this list with you guys and just share my reactions and thoughts and my reactions since I'm re recording thoughts on some of these books in hopes that really for me that I'm going to find some new books to add on to my TBR and hopefully this will inspire you to read some of these books as well. I think this is a really cool list. I'm ready to look through it yet again. But hopefully I'm pretty sure I'll still be enthusiastic because I had to go through half of it again the last time because this is my third time trying to record this. And I was still excited about some of these books. I have already read some of the books on this list, so I will point those out as we go. But I'm going to try and keep this moving because it's a lot to record and I want to keep it condensed so that it will correctly upload this time. All right, here we go. So I'm kind of in the middle of the list, but we're going to start right at the top. I think the first couple ones are slightly out of order, but they're all well and good. The thing that I love about this website is that if you just hover over the name of the book, it shows you the picture, information about the genre, and a little blurb about what the book is about. Due to time, I'm not going to sit here and read all the descriptions. You are welcome to pause this video and read the description yourself, or even go to the site and look up more about the book if you're interested. So the first one here is Old St. Paul's by William Harrison Ainsworth. I hadn't heard of this book before I looked it up, but I know it has something to do with St. Paul's Cathedral. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I will click on this one because I just want to make sure that I'm correct. But if I recall correctly, yeah, this book is about historical events and a tragic love affair unfolding around the cathedral. Yes, please. I want to read that. Love me a good Victorian tragic love affair. So I'm just going to, I have here, I printed out a list with all the 100 list. So I'm just going to be marking for myself the books that I want to add onto my story graph. And I'm going to tell you right now, William Harrison Ainsworth has 3 books on here. I'm adding all 3 of his books on because they all sound very fascinating to me. The next book is The Tower of London. The Tower of London, from what I can tell, is similar. All 3 of his books seem to be a very similar theme where he takes a well-known landmark and he writes some story around them, usually some tragic love affair. So, and then the third one is Windsor Castle. This one sounds really good. I mean, you're talking about historical fiction here taking place way closer to the time, well, way closer to the time it happened. This one is talks about the Windsor Castle, Henry VIII, Anne Boleyn. Yes. So I can't wait to read that. I will note that I thought it was interesting. The one book that I know of by William Ainsworth is actually the Lincolnshire, or the I always mess up the word. I think it's the Lincolnshire Witches. And that's not on this list. And I was very surprised by that because it's the one that I've still heard come up every now and again. And that book, I guess he talks about and sets it during the time where they're kind of burning the witches slash burning the women. And he discusses that issue. So he seems to get into a lot of the historical issues that England has had and tells a story around them. He also seems to like to write a really long book, and I like to read a really long book. So, yeah, I can't wait to hopefully one day find some of his works and start reading it. All right, moving on. Pride and Prejudice. We do start getting into some well known and still loved authors. Jane Austen. I'm not a huge Jane Austen fan. I can get into that another time, but I know people like Pride and Prejudice. I really like the BBC movie. But I don't have any plans to reread that anytime soon. Jane Austen has two novels on this list. Sense and Sensibility is the second one. And yeah, I haven't read Sense and Sensibility. I've read Pride and Prejudice. I've read Emma. I read some third book by her. They all kind of feel the same to me. Like, I get it, kind of a romance novel. All right. Oh, see, this is what happens when you have to re record. I had figured out how to say the name of this book. So in English, it's usually translated as Old Gorio, I think is how you pronounce the name. But in French, I think it's actually not old, but Father Gorio, because I think it's Perry. Oh, see, it's gone. I do own this book. I do plan on reading it. I think the idea of it, an old man, a criminal, a law student. Yep, you had me. You got me. There is A Window in the Thrums by J.M. Barrie. I had never heard of this book. It sounds kind of fairyland-ish. It's about J.M. Barrie's hometown. I thought that it's interesting that this book is on this list because J.M. Barrie, if you don't know, is actually the author of Peter Pan. So I'm like, so Peter Pan's not on this list, but A Window in the Thrums, which I've never heard of, is. So that's fascinating to me. I am interested in reading A Window in the Thrums. I kind of want to read that and Peter Pan and see what the difference in aesthetics and taste might be between 1899 and Peter Pan, or 1899 and today. Because Peter Pan, I would say, of the J.M. Barrie novels, is the one that we know, maybe just because it's a Disney movie. Probably because it's a Disney movie. Then there's The Golden Butterfly by Sir Walter Besant. No idea. I couldn't find any information about this on the Storygraph either, which is the book tracking app that I use. So I'm not going to add it to my list for now. Robbery Under Arms. So this one got added onto mine. It's a bush ranging adventure, an Australian classic. I have never heard of this book before. It's by Rolf uh, Boulderwood. Boulderwood. I have no idea, but I just think that's so interesting. An Australian classic. Like, that's something that I don't feel like you come across that often. Next, we have Lady Audley's Secret by Mary Elizabeth Braddon. I feel like this is a book that if you do Victober, that kind of thing on BookTube, you've probably heard of. It is a sensation novel. I own it. I'm looking forward to read it. I love myself a good sensation novel. I've never read anything by Mary Elizabeth Braddon, so I'm very interested to hear about it, or read it rather. Then you get into the Brontes. Charlotte Bronte is on this list. She has two books on this list. One of them is Shirley, and the other one is Jane Eyre. I just reread Jane Eyre earlier this year, really enjoyed it again. I'm looking forward to reading Shirley. I've never read that. I also have Villette, which is interesting that it's not on here. Also notable is that none of the other Bronte sisters are on this list either. So I don't know the history of when the writings of the other Bronte sisters came out compared to Charlotte's, but it seems like even back then that Charlotte was the more popular one. And I feel like when I was in like grade school and high school, Charlotte was also still the more popular of the Bronte sisters, and especially her writings. I feel like nowadays the tides are turning a bit, and people have, like, from person to person, it can vary who's which of the sisters' writings people like the best. Next, we have a slew of writings by Edward Bulwer Lytton. He has 4 books on this list, and I did not find a lot of good descriptions on the story graph, so I'm hoping to have some good ones here. The Caxtons was one of the few of his that I added to my list because, again, I like a good family story. This one is subtitled A Family Picture, so yep, that was like an easy yes for me. Um, Oddly enough, there are some books on this list that are on this list that got skipped. I think they're just in different orders, so I won't point them out just yet. Um, the Last of the Barons was another one that I had trouble looking up. I'm glad to see that on here they have a little bit of a description, and I kind of like what I'm seeing. So I might add this to my list of books to be read. Night and Morning, which I think is like a mystery or a crime detective novel type of thing. But I guess it was in this book that it the book starts. It was a dark and stormy night, and it was from this book that whole crime thing with that as being the phrase that we connect it with today. Basically, this is the book that started the cliche. So I want to read it because I find that very fascinating. We go on to his last book that is on this list, which is Renzi, The Last of the Roman Tribunes. That's all I got. I can't find any other description of it anywhere else. So that's not enough to get me interested. Next, we have The Deemster by Hall Caine. This book sounds really fascinating. I know there's not a lot in the description here, but the description I recall reading just sounded fantastic. It was like mystery and murder and mayhem, and I'm pretty sure it's a sensation novel, and I love it. This one's talking about quirks and folklore represented in British lit. I don't know, that's talking more about Caine, the book itself. I'll click on it just to see if they include any more about this actual book. Follows the life of Dan Malria, a bishop's son who lapses into a life of crime. See, even there, it sounds like a book I want to read. And like, why is he tied up like that? Life and Adventures of Valentine Vox by Henry Cockton. The idea of the life and adventures of someone and telling a story in that framework was very, very, very popular for a very long time, starting in the 1700s, kind of going forward, really starting even earlier than that. This story, from what I read somewhere else, is actually the life and adventures of Valentine Vox, the ventriloquist. Yep, I want to read the life and adventures of a ventriloquist. What is that even going to be? And let's talk about that alliteration there. A plus, love it. Okay, back on maybe more familiar territory for people, there is The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins, and there is also The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins. I have read both of these books. I reread The Moonstone earlier this year, loved it. I just read No Name, which is not on here and should, because that is the best book probably that will be on this list. I certainly think it would be one of the 100 best novels in the world in 1899, but I don't know. Nobody gives that book love. So I love Wilkie Collins. He does great mysteries. The Woman in White is a sensation novel. The Moonstone is a sensation novel. My honorable mention, No Name, is a sensation novel. Do not read the description of any of these books. I'm moving the thing off of that. Descriptions of classic books, especially if they're a mystery, those descriptions usually contain spoilers and they will ruin a good book for you. All right, we also have James Fenimore Cooper. Here they have The Pathfinder, and there is also The Prairie. And for some reason, again, these books are out of order, but you will also find The Last of the Mohicans on here. I did discover that these are part of a series, and it mentions it in here, the Leather Stocking Tales series. And the 3 books of Jane Fenimore Cooper's that are on this list, I believe, are the second, third, and fifth book in the 5-book series. I don't know why they didn't put book number 1, which is The Deer Slayer, which he's still really well known for, and they didn't put book 4. So I don't know what the thought was there, but apparently the editors and creators who made this list didn't like the first and the fourth book as much as the second, third, and fifth. So go figure. That still happens sometimes today in other book things where books will win prizes or other stuff like that. Not the first book in the series, but like the second, third, or fifth book in the series. And I'm like, that makes no sense. Like, if the first book's not good enough to read it, why am I going to read the second book? I don't know. Anyway, it's a series. I don't know if it's necessary to read all the books in the series to them, but I will read probably at least The Deer Slayer and The Last of the Mohicans to see if I want to read the rest of the series, I guess. We then go on to John Halifax Gentleman by Dinah Crake. I am not that familiar with this book, but I do want to read it. I've heard about it from the booktube channel Books and Things. She really likes Dinah Crake's book Olive, but she has also mentioned John Halifax Gentleman. So I do want to read this book. Mr. Isaacs, A Tale of Modern India by F. Marion Crawford. I don't know about this book. It's supposed to be a brilliant sketch of modern Anglo Indian life, uh, mingled with a touch of Oriental mystery. I don't know. The Victorians and talking about India, I don't know. Like, I want to read the book because I want to see how they talked about it, but it's usually not good, folks. It's usually problematic by today's standards, but I'm going to read it because I am interested. Apparently, this book was very successful, and I'd be curious to see what they would read and find to be a very successful and interesting read. Then we get into my beloved Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens, thus far as I've looked, has the most books on this list. They have 5 of his books: Dombey and Son, Martin Chuzzlewit's, Nicholas Nickleby, The Old Curiosity Shop, and Oliver Twist. I have to say, I'm really surprised. And I find this really, really interesting because they are, one, not the books that I would say the general public nowadays knows Charles Dickens for, which would be A Christmas Carol, Great Expectations, and I guess Oliver Twist is the third one, where if you've heard of any of his stories, those are ones that you've heard. It also doesn't include David Copperfield, which is my personal favorite. So I feel a little iffy about this list now. Not really, but a little bit. Of these books, I am actually interested in reading all of them because I really like Charles Dickens' writings and want to read everything he's ever written. And if you've seen my other video about what's on my shelf, Charles Dickens, you'll see I have all of his writings and plan on reading all of them. On this particular list, probably the books that they list that I'm most excited about reading and want to get to sooner than later would be Dombey and Son. Moving on, there is The Firm of Girdlestone. This is by Arthur Conan Doyle. The Firm of Girdlestone is actually about a father-son firm that is corrupt, and it's just about the story of their crimes. So, to me, like, I've never particularly been interested in Sherlock Holmes, though I find how successful and how beloved to this day those books are interesting. But it makes me want to read The Firm of Girdlestone, given that this is the book of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's that has made this list, and not any of the Sherlock Holmes books. So that's fascinating. Then we get into Alexander Dumas. He has 3 books on this list: The Count of Monte Cristo, 20 Years After, and The Three Musketeers. So I'm going to start by talking about The Count of Monte Cristo. I read this book earlier this year. Love, 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 love. Do not read an abridged version of this. I mean, read an abridged version if you want to. I did not. I read the full Penguin Classic version, all 1,200 some odd pages. It was great. It kept going. I broke it up into like 40 pages a night, and it was hard to put down. It was a mistake to read it at night because I'd get so excited I'd have trouble going to bed, or I'd stay up reading more than 4 pages. And yeah, it's great. It's suspenseful. There are so many surprises and shocks and twists and turns in that book. It was just really fascinating. And even though it's referred to as a revenge and adventure novel, I think it's so much more than that. It's really a novel about seeking justice while trying to get revenge, and considering how far is too far and at what point should justice no longer be taken in an individual person's hand. Just read it. It's so good. The Three Musketeers is also on this list. I'm excited. I own that book. I plan on reading it next. If you did not know, The Three Musketeers is actually part of a series following the young D'Artagnan, I believe is how you say it. It's D'Artagnan Romances, I believe is what the series is called. One recommendation I have gotten is that if you plan on reading The Three Musketeers and you want to read the whole series, get this series from one publishing company. They don't have the entire series on here. They just have The Three Musketeers and 20 Years After. So I think that is rather interesting. I'm interested just in reading The Three Musketeers. I have heard you can read it as a standalone and that you don't have to continue the series. And depending on how much I like that will determine whether or not I continue reading the series. So now we come to the first book that truly makes me question some of the stories on here. Scenes of Clerical Life by George Eliot. I am not a George Eliot fan. I have no intentions of reading this, even though it's a series of short stories. No. We have Joseph Andrews by Henry Fielding. Henry Fielding was wrote a lot of satires, and one of the books he wrote a satire of is the book Pamela, and one of his satires of it was the book Shamala. So obviously making fun of the main character in Pamela, and then he also wrote Joseph Andrews, which is making fun of Pamela's father. Pamela's father's name was Joseph Andrews, so he satirizes that whole thing as well. So I have Shamala and Joseph Andrews in a bind up, so I can't wait to read the part about Joseph Andrews. All right. Tom Jones. So, Tom Jones, I read this before back in college. I don't think for a class, but just because it was loosely related. I studied 18th century British lit, so Tom Jones fits right in there. Henry Fielding was really well known for his satires, and I think Tom Jones is one of his best. I own the book. I plan on reading it again. I'm looking forward to it. Few writers can make me laugh constantly like Henry Fielding can. Next up, we have Mary Barton by Elizabeth Gaskell. So I read North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell earlier this year, and I just thought it was okay. I have heard that if you're not as huge a fan of that, you might like Mary Barton better. Similar theme, idea, and plot, and all that kind of thing. Mary Barton was written first, and is my understanding is North and South was supposed to be like her better, more finished version of that. But I guess the story is very just enough, and the writing style differs just enough, and there's that kind of thing that you might like Mary Barton better. So I am willing to give Mary Barton a try. I do own it. I do plan on reading it at some point. Adventures of an Aide de Camp. So I did not find any information on this on the story graph when I was filming earlier. I have no idea what this description is talking about either. I'm not sure if I'm going to read this. Again, like I mentioned, like the idea of following the adventures of somebody was interesting. I don't know that I want to follow the adventures of an aide de camp. This is written by James Grant. The Romance of War or the Highlanders in Spain, France, and Belgium by James Grant. That sounds really interesting. Both of these, it sounds like he wrote war stories. I'm not very interested in that topic in general, so moving on. Gabriel Conroy by Bret Hart. Didn't we talk about him already? No, maybe I'm recalling my last video. This says it's a Western. Uh, wow. Okay, about pioneers trapped in inclement weather in California's Sierra Desert. Um, why does that sound like every Western written about people being trapped somewhere out west? I don't mean to laugh. That's kind of cruel. But I wasn't going to add that onto my list, but I am now. That sounds kind of fascinating. Okay, we're going to keep going with this and get through as much as we can because this video is trying to cut me off again. I'm going to assume that I cut myself off at the Seven Gables. I do want to read this. It's by Nathaniel Hawthorne. I've read The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne. The House of Gables sounds different. I don't have any plans to read The Scarlet Letter again anytime soon, but it is interesting about just the topics it broaches and the criticism it has of pure puritanical Boston and New England and America in general during the 17th century. That House of Seven Gables, I know nothing about it. It sounds like a very different take on Nathaniel Hawthorne's writing, so I'm interested to see what that's like. Elsie Venner, A Romance of Destiny. I read the description of this on Storygraph, and I was like, what? Let me read this book. So, I mean, read the description here. It mentions supernatural neuroses, uh, the girl's mother being bit by a poisonous snake, and then the girl taking on some sort of like reptilian characteristics, original sin, redemption, so many things that I just want to read about. So this is by Oliver Wendell Holmes and sounds fascinating. The Prisoner of Zenda. This isn't a good cover. There's a better cover that I found on Storygraph, but it's supposed to be, well, it's not supposed to be. It is by Anthony Hope, and it's supposed to be a swashbuckling romance, and apparently one of his best. So that sounded fun and wonderful to me. If I recall, it is part of a series, a trilogy, in fact, and I think I added all three books of the trilogy onto my TBR. Tom Brown's School Days. Oh, look at that cute cover. I saw a different the cover earlier. Tom Brown's School Days by Thomas Hughes. Apparently, this character of Tom Brown's, this is a children's book, was very well known during the Victorian period. And I guess in some ways it inspired Henry Fielding's character, Tom Jones. And so I really want to read it just because of that. I don't tend to read a lot of children's fictions, but I am always interested in reading books that inspired authors to write other books that I like. So I do want to read this. And the version that I found earlier is actually a bind up of two books about Tom Brown's. It's basically a series. So I do want to read both books in the series. Another book by Victor Hugo, or another book. I don't know if I talked about any of his books yet. There are three books by Victor Hugo on this list: The Hunchback of Notre Dame, Les Mis, and The Toilers of the Sea. I have read Les Mis. I really liked the vast majority of it. Victor Hugo, my understanding is, tends to go on really long tangents in his books. Yes, yes, he does. And so a lot of people say that it's better to read his abridged versions. I don't know. I think it depends on your style. I read Les Mis. I got through the really, 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 really long tangents that he threw in there. And I'd say the vast majority of the book made it worth it. If I read it again, I'm not going to lie, I'd read it in an abridged version. I do want to try The Hunchback of Notre Dame in an unabridged version. And I threw the Toilers of the Sea on there because I had never heard of it, and I want to keep it in my mind. Alton Locke by Charles Kingsley is one of the many books on here by Charles Kingsley. Actually, many books. He has three. The other ones are Hypatia and 2 years ago. None of these sounded particularly interested to me. Like Hypatia maybe sounds the most interesting in terms of, I think it also has to do with like an Egyptian philosopher or something like that, but I wasn't particularly grabbed by any of his works. You also have the Recollections of Geoffrey Hamlin by Henry Kingsley, who Charles and Henry Kingsley are brothers. So I thought that was interesting. But there was nothing I didn't find, and still am not finding any great descriptions of this book. The Soldiers 3 by Rudyard Kipling is on here. I thought that was fascinating. He is really well known for the Jungle Book, which is not on this list. I thought that was fascinating. I don't plan on reading Soldiers 3, though. It seems like it might be a war military book, and that's just not my thing. Guy Livingstone, or Thoreau, by George A. Lawrence. I really couldn't find any good descriptions of what this book is like, so it's just going to sit on the side for me for now. Harry Lorecker, here we go. Harry Lorecker is on here by Charles James Lever. Charles James Lever was, as it says, an Irish novelist, and most of his books seem to be about Irish people or on themes like that. So I was very happy to see that there are Irish authors on this list. He has another one, Charles O'Malley. I didn't find a lot of descriptions about these books, so I don't plan on reading them. You also have Samuel Lover, who has Handy Andy, another Irish writer. He also wrote Rory or More, which is also on this list. Again, I didn't find any great descriptions of these books, so I have no intention of adding them to my TBR list. Next, we have The Atonement of Liam Dundas, a novel by Eliza Lynn. This one is kind of interesting. On my book list, it is called The Atonement of Lern Dundas by E. Lynn Linton. They are the same person. I couldn't find any information about this book, though I did find other books of hers. She seems like maybe she writes Victorian Gothic novels. I don't know. Jacob Faithful by Frederick Marriott. He has a lot of books on this list. He was a naval officer who then retired and seems to have written a lot of books, like naval adventure stories. So he has Jacob Faithful, The King's Own, and Mr. Midshipman Easy. These are not his only novels, but they're the ones that are on this list. He seems to have been a fairly prolific author, and there's a lot of future authors that really liked him and his writing. And I swear there's some book that I read of his where he was either, or not of his, but there was some book that I read that either referenced him or somewhat made fun of his books. From what I can tell, his books were just really good seafaring stories. I would like to read at least one or two of them to get a sense. And based on the look of the cover of these books, I do think they're still in publication. There's also Peter Simple of his that's on here. So he only has one fewer books than Charles Dickens on this list, if that means anything. Then there's Diana of the Crossways. I am interested in reading this book. I did find somewhere um, some sort of description of what this book is about, but at least at the bottom here, it says that the author, George Meredith, was an advocate for the rights of women. So I think that's really fascinating. I'd like to support his writing even today. We have Under Two Flags, a story of the household and the desert by Ouida. This cover doesn't make it look very interesting, but the version I saw in the Storygraph did look really interesting. The plot sounded really interesting. It sounded like crime and mayhem and, abandoning family and defending people and giving it all up for honor and glory. And yeah, I want to read it. Charles Reed is another author who has quite a few books on this list. He has Hard Cash. It is Never Too Late to Mend. Peg Woofington and Christy Johnston. And that's it. I can't figure out what any of his books are really about. They all seem to be social justice bent. I know It Is Never Too Late to Mend, I think, has to do with prison reform. There is The Headless Horseman, which goes back further than Washington Irving's tale, whose name they still do not mention. I can't think of it. If I remember, I'll put it on the screen. But anyway, Thomas Mayne Reid wrote, I guess, one of the original stories about the legend of the Legend of Sleepy Hollow. That's the book that's by Washington Irving that mentions a headless horseman. Apparently, Thomas Mayne Reid mentioned a headless horseman in a book earlier. I have no plans on reading that. Sounds kind of scary. I'm not going to lie. There's Virginia of Virginia, a story by Emily Reeves. Couldn't find anything about it. That's like pretty much the best picture you're going to see. Then there's The Story of an African Farm, the story of three children who grow up on a farm in South Africa and their journey into adulthood. Oh, sounds kind of like a Bildungsroman. I'm into that. I actually have made it further than when I first tried recording this. Yay! Let's keep going. Okay, I'm going to go with it. I like a good Bildungsroman that sounds like where it's going. Let's read it. The Cruise of Midge. Is this The Cruise of Midge or The Curse of Midge? No, it's The Cruise of Midge by Michael Scott. Scottish born, so that's good. Semi-autobiographical. I don't know. That cover looks scary and is not even the right book. I'm going to pass. Tom Kringle's Log. Okay, this seems like it's back into the seafaring trip kind of travelogue thing. Yeah, not really my thing. The Bride of Lammermoor by Sir Walter Scott. Why does this sound familiar? Okay, Sir Walter Scott sounds familiar for other reasons, but this particular book sounds really familiar. I don't know why. So I'm going to add it to my list, and I'll just have to look it up later to see if I can find more about it. Okay. Sir Walter Scott. Oh, now that I'm looking at it, has quite a few books. I think he might have beat Charles Dickens. He also has Guy Mannering. This also sounds kind of interesting. Kenilworth. Old Mortality. Rob Roy, which I believe I read and found rather boring. So I'm not going to try it again. But it's set during the time of the Jacobite Rising. So if you're interested in that kind of politics, maybe you'll enjoy Rob Roy. The Talisman. And finally, Woodstock. So he tended to write a lot of historical novels, a lot about wars, that kind of thing. Not always my thing, but The Bride of Lammermoor really sounds familiar. Okay, moving on, we have Quo Vadis, I believe is how it's pronounced, by Henrique. I'm not going to try that last name. I don't know if it's the phrase itself is familiar or if the book itself is what's familiar to me. But either way, it's going on my to-be-read list. We have Frank Farley, or Scenes from the Life of a Private Pupil. That sounds kind of interesting. I like Scenes from a Private Life. The Adventures of Peregrine Pickle. I do already have this on my to-be-read list. Roderick Random. I also have this on my list, partially because I love Don Quixote and there's similar vibes going on there. So I'm very interested in reading more about this. Both those last two books are by Tobias Smollett. On the Face of Waters by Flora Annie Webster Steele. That's a lot of names going on there. I don't know. Sounds like a Western. Don't really know much about it. Gonna keep going. The Life and Opinions of Tristram Shandy. Absolutely. The title reminds me of John Halifax Gentleman. Trust and believe Tristan Shandy, even though it says gentleman. Yeah, there's questionable things. I'm looking forward to reading this book. Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe, certainly an American classic, focuses on slave Uncle Tom and the cruelty of slavery. I do own this book. I am planning on reading it at some point in the future. The Wandering Jew by Eugene Sue. So I have not heard of this book before. Yeah, I don't know. Again, questionable characterization here. I'm not sure. I'd have to read some more about the book itself. Mr. Sponge's Sporting Tour. This sounds like it would be a funny novel, just based on the title. So, humorous narrative of the sporting experiences of a Cockney grocer. I don't know. I don't. I'm gonna have to let that one sit there. It's by Robert Smith Surtees. Barry London by William Makepeace Thackeray, who you would know maybe more popularly for Vanity Fair. Uh, I'm intrigued that this is the book of his that is on here. Let's see if Vanity Fair is. No, it is not. So you could read Barry Lyndon, The History of Henry Esmond, or The Newcomes, which kind of reminds me of Vanity Fair, because in Vanity Fair, I believe they were the newcomers, and they also had a fortune. Well, I guess in Vanity Fair, nobody knows where their fortune came from. So if I like Vanity Fair, which I have, I may read these other three books by William Makepeace Thackeray, because I do like reading all of an author's work if I enjoy them. Speaking of which, our next author, and I'm almost at the end of this list, is Leo Tolstoy, Anna Karenina. Read that for the first time this year. Loved it. I really like Leo Tolstoy and what he does with his characters and his writing and his philosophy and all of that. This is a really good book. I have it in multiple translations and plan on rereading it. Orley Farm by Anthony Trollope. I have not heard of this book of his. I have read The Warden by him, and that's it so far. I do plan on reading quite a few more of his other books. And I will add this to my list so I don't forget it. Robert Elsmere by Mrs. Humphrey Ward. Before we move on, I want to point out that none of Anthony Trollope's books that we talk about today are on this list. That's fascinating and makes me want to read Orley Farm. Robert Elsmere, A Brilliant Afternoon Towards the End of May. Nothing about that's really grabbing me, not standing out. The Wide Wide World by Susan Warner. Oh, this sounds like a book that has a theme that is like still relevant even today, and that is questions that people ask. That sounds really interesting. I'll probably read that. 10,000 a Year by Samuel Warren. No description, no idea, no clue. No thanks for now. Market Harborough by G.J. White Melville. Again, no information. Looks like horses. Not into that. And finally, East Lynne. I do have this on my to be read. I've heard good things about this. Looks at the anxieties of Victorian middle class, which I don't feel like is a topic that comes up that frequently in books. The breakdown of social order as divorce became more readily available. Sounds fascinating. Definitely want to read this. Okay, I'll link the actual website that I found this on. I'm really excited about these books, and I hope this at least gave you a quick glimpse at a description of these books, covers of these books, and gave you some ideas as to whether or not you would like to read some of these books as well. So that's it for today. You're going to start seeing some of these books come up on my reading list and on my to be read lists. Let me know if you've read any of these books or enjoyed them, or if there's ones that I said I don't plan on reading that you know about and think I should read. Please mention those in the comments below. That's it for now. It is super late here. I'm tired, and I'm still at some point going to have to edit this humongous video. All right, have a good day. Bye.